But I want to start off with what happened to me. So I worked in higher ed. I worked at a large university in Boston. I worked in a communications role at one of the schools there. And for about 6 months into the job, I really liked it. I reported to an associate or assistant dean, and then just on the website, I reported to another dean who wasn't my boss, but she oversaw this project. And then about 6 months in, I really liked even working with her, but about 6 months in, things started to turn around. And she started removing responsibilities from me. She framed them as a positive thing, but there was never a discussion of poor performance. And so, I things started to escalate from there. She started what she said was an advisory committee for the website, and the website was like the one thing I really was excited to, or the main thing I was excited to work on in that job. Um, she built this advisory committee, then excluded me from it. It was comprised of a lot of people with no background in web, and I really felt like she was sabotaging me and undermining me. And so I went to report this to the interim dean. Because he was an interim dean, I don't think he was really invested in it too much, but he kind of blew me off. He said that this will work itself out, and of course, it didn't. I ended up going to HR, found out that many other people in the school, all women, also reported this assistant dean um, for similar reasons. And HR pretty much not blatantly sided with her, but they asked me questions like, how do you feel, or how do you think she feels that you were coming to talk about her with me? And so I felt pretty early on that like this university is not going to do anything about this problem. In hindsight, I found out that that's part of the playbook, how this operates, how organizations avoid liability. But at the time, I trusted the university to do something, and I felt betrayed by them. I had sleepless nights wondering what this woman was going to do next. Um, in fact, once I spoke up, the three assistant associate deans met with me, and I got an apology from her. But within weeks, she sent me a formal written warning that I had swapped out a news story on the website homepage without this committee's approval, when, she said numerous times that this was just an advisory committee, and there was no process in place for that. So I realized that she could get me fired if she wanted to, just based on her false narrative. And I felt like, that could derail my career, that could ruin future job prospects. And I thought to myself, like, this cannot possibly be legal. And soon found out that it was. So there was this third layer of betrayal: first her, then the employer, then the system that did not say that what she was doing was wrong. Um, and then that's when I got involved with advocacy. So my story of recovery kind of bounces around. I'll get into that, but really, what it revolved around was my understanding of power. And as I did research and got more involved, from 2007 on, I just sort of did this deep dive into advocacy and trying to pass legislation around this issue. And a lot of that time was focused on researching this issue and hearing people's stories. And one of the things that really struck me was some research that a lot of targets of workplace abuse, not all, but it's very common for targets to have experienced authoritarian families growing up. And so my healing story really revolved around understanding childhood trauma and my relationship to power. And in that authoritarian setup, I would basically hand my power over to what other people thought in my family. Realized that I was I was resigning my own opinions of the world to other people and deferring to their life experiences as if it were more valid than my own. And in going through that, processing of not feeling heard and not having my feelings validated or reflected back a lot through childhood, um, I really went through kind of a healing process there and understood that I was looking for that external validation, and that related to, in part, to my workplace abuse situation. And then eventually getting to a place that I'll get into a little bit later, of having compassion for them, which helped reduce the anger, but also accountability, where um, I wasn't just accepting everything that came my way from these people who weren't respecting my own feelings and opinions. I was having compassion for this situation, that they were looking for power and control, but also, giving them accountability when they were doing that. So in research, and this is um, sort of what I'm talking about with this dynamic, is that the abuser typically operates from a lens of power and control for superiority, and it means worthiness to them. This note here is specific to the workplace, of high performers being a threat to them, but they operate from fear, jealousy, and insecurity. And I was able to eventually see that in my family, which helped me see that in the workplace. They're threatened by vulnerability and competence. It triggers shame in them. If there's narcissism there, not always, but there can be, there's a lack of empathy. They don't see people as people. Um, there can be an excessive attention to self-image. So this idea of having a big but fragile ego. They're used to using and manipulating other people. There's often a low self-esteem, lack of self-reflection, denial of imperfections, focus on their own personal agendas. A lot of this might sound familiar to you. Um, they're competitive, seeing limited resources instead of being collaborative and looking at the bottom line and the impact that the organization has. And a lot of times they'll create chaos so that they can look important at other, in comparison to other people. And this worldview is deeply rooted in childhood as well. Or both worldviews are rooted in conditional love in childhood, where they instead of my root of thinking that I needed to seek other people's approval, they had this other lens of feeling like they were superior to people, and used this behavior of power and control. But both coming from these childhoods where we didn't feel heard, or our worthiness was tied to some kind of behavior instead of our just inherent worth. So Vicki mentioned Dignity Together. As a result of all of this research, I got certified in coaching, and I started my own course around workplace abuse, really focused on the connection between people as a way to help people see that there's a playbook, help people detach from what they're going through, and help them see that it's not just the abuser lens, but it's the work culture that I talked about, in my own experience and many other people's experience, where the employer just does nothing. They don't want to acknowledge harm because they don't want the liability of admitting that harm happened under their watch. And then there's the whole culture of, our worth being tied to who we are in the capitalist structure, and our worth in this sexist, racist, heteronormative, um, ableist culture. A lot of isms going on that um, put positive stereotypes on some people and negative stereotypes on other people, and how that affects our self-worth, internalized depression, and how those things play out in the workplace, of just reinforcing those stereotypes, people in power writing the rules to keep themselves in power. So for me, and for a lot of people we've seen that we've worked with, this is really about the healing comes from understanding our own personal power for a lot of people. Like I said, this isn't a universal experience, but it's a very common experience with healing from workplace abuse.